Hello, everyone. This is Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and from Info Voices. And this is one of our regular webinars that we do from time to time. We try to do them every week. And in this particular webinar, we've got Robin Chandler with us. Now, Robin is a person who lives in the United States, northeast of the United States, in a university there. And she has for a long time been interested in identity politics and how we cross or navigate across borders in order that we can communicate with each other. Robin did a webinar with us some time ago where we linked up some of her students with those in the University of Reading. Anyhow, Robin, thank you for joining us and for, taking part in this webinar today. Maybe you could start by telling us a bit about something about yourself and the academic work that you do.
Thanks, Francis. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you again. It's so important that we maintain networks of communication with one another across all the continents over the years, because our planet is truly troubled in many ways. The only way we're going to resolve this is by remaining in communication with one another. Some of what I'm going to talk about today might suggest some ways that we can think about doing that. My work really began as a social scientist in the 1990s. I was originally a trained professional visual artist who went and took another route and became a social scientist after getting a doctorate in sociology in the States, and then working at Northeastern University as a senior tenured faculty member for about 30 years. I've just retired, so I'm supposed to be laying on a beach somewhere relaxing and enjoying myself, but I think for reasons that you will learn quite shortly, it's very difficult to do that if you're a type A driven personality. Much of my work has been as a gender specialist in international development, and that's taken me to many countries where I've worked with many different kinds of people in the NGO system and governmental systems, with private institutions, with religious organizations, to try to innovate new ways of building bridges, sustaining bridges, and keeping the communication going across different kinds of differences, if I could say it that way. So, there aren't just the basic differences of race and gender, but they're much deeper differences that we have to navigate that will ultimately make more sense when I start talking about the boxes that we live in.
Okay, I mean, you talk about the boxes and the silos. Do you mean just gender or race, or are there all sorts of sort of boxes we create for ourselves?
Yeah, that's the problem. What a 20th century social psychologist, Gordon Allport, called concentric loyalties. And I like them because I use an exercise with my students, at least I have over the years, to get them to think about how our concentric loyalties can change with age. So what are your centric loyalties at 18 may be very different when you're 40. But the basic variables from a research point of view that are our concentric loyalties are obviously gender, class, race, religion. Those are the primary ones we think about, and they're the primary ones that impact our daily lives either positively or negatively. The fact that we've lost sight of the way in which some of these variables can impact our lives has to do with histories of imperialism and histories of racial supremacy, pathologies of patriarchy, all of which are thousands of years old. And I think what I would most like us to think about today is something that I call spiritual capital. What are our internal assets that we can use to help break out of these boxes that we're stuck in, that continue to demand certain things from us, that are part of the internal propaganda that we keep going on in our own lives, in our families, in our workplaces, all of these places.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the spiritual capital, or the concept of nobility, in a minute. But let's look at the positive side of those silos. I mean, without identity politics, the women's movement and the Black movement would have not got as far as it had, would they?
Well, they were appropriate for their time. I mean, if you ask me what the defining challenges are, I'll tell you one thing. If you asked Madiba, the late Mandela, what the defining challenge of his time was, he would have said, and he did say, in fact, bringing democracy to his country, bringing democracy to the apartheid state. What then is the question, the defining challenge of the 21st century? I'm not going to go much farther afield than gender as the defining challenge of the 21st century. And the reason is that our loyalties to certain forms of patriarchy have actually created a very imbalanced society. The disequilibrium that we experience in all parts of the world has to do with the fact that half of the planet's population is given roles, rights, responsibilities, and relationships in a preferential way, and the other half are denied those. And you can't expect us to be in a situation where climate change is overwhelming all of us and impacting all of us on a daily basis and not ask yourself, what are the gender implications of this? Have we asked rural women who are, I don't know, 70 to 80% of the world's population, what their input is on how to solve and address issues of climate change? So we don't often ask those groups that have been marginalized and excluded. And in the case of race and gender, most of the people on the planet who look like me are the people who've been marginalized and excluded. We need to get those people back to the table.
Well, the problem is with those groups that are marginalized, they are trying to get back on the table. And they're doing that sometimes through a form of national populism. Someone said once that wherever there's identity politics, there's always populism, because it's a sort of negative consequence of identity politics. Those who are marginalized try to find a way of getting in on the scene, and they use the populist way of doing it. Is that a problem we have to face?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no question about it. But we also have to look at sources. And when I mentioned imperialism earlier, I didn't throw that out just as a sort of, academic political term. Imperialism basically created segregated societies that were based on race and class. And that's where the source of the problem really lies. And unfortunately, it happened on every continent. This idea that the personhood of individuals was only meant for white men. And so we are having to go back and redress all of those original imbalances in my country, in your country, in many other countries in the world. And that's where part of the solution lies, because there's so much ignorance about our history and so much ignorance about how to redeem our history. One of my favorite quotes was written by Confucius centuries ago, and it goes, "Ignorance is the night of the mind, a night without moon or stars." And one of the reasons I love that quote is because it lets us know that there can't be anything more important to our objective of social justice and world peace than knowledge. What we know about one another, what we think we know about one another, our stereotypes about one another, how we communicate across partisan boundaries, across race, across gender. It's so important. My second favorite quote is by an American science fiction writer who passed away a few years ago named Sherry Tepper. And she was fond of saying, "Nothing limits intelligence more than ignorance. Nothing fosters ignorance more than one's own opinions. Nothing strengthens opinions more than refusing to look at reality." And that's part of our problem as men, as women, as white people, as brown people, as rich people, as poor people, is our inability to actually look at reality rather than our opinions and what we think is appropriate, what we think is correct.
Yeah, I mean, an example of that is what you gave. I mean, if you talk about climate change, for example, sometimes those boxes we created and that become entrenched talk about climate change, and people will suddenly get involved in a debate on identity politics, and they'll forget the existential problem that everyone faces. And that we've got to overcome somehow, haven't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I call it, spiritual capital. I know nobody wants to use that word, especially in academia. It's unfashionable because it has this hint of religious, except it addresses itself to the Yasso model that I've talked with you about at another time, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's this model that's used in academia that addresses the increasing presence of students of color in colleges and universities around the world. And one of the principal forms of capital that he's excluded from that model that needs to be added is this idea of spirituality. I mean, what would happen if every one of us treated one another as if we were noble? Not the kind of noble associated with the old school idea of aristocracy and social status, but the idea that one has born into this world a sense of inherent nobility. I mean, I know that sounds idealistic, but frankly, that's where we're at because people aren't treated that way. And so it's I think, absolutely instrumental to our pursuit of social justice that we look at the spiritual assets that everybody brings to the table. You know, it reminds me of another quote that is found in Obama's book, Dreams from My Father. And in reflecting back on the civil rights movement, he says, communities had to be created, fought for, and tended like gardens. They expanded or contracted with the dreams of men. Through organizing, through shared sacrifice, membership had to be earned. And so in this quote of his, he's talking about if you want to be a part of a social justice movement, you really have to be prepared to make sacrifices. You have to be prepared to defer to group consultation. You have to be prepared to help to keep the dream alive in its pristine form. And the kinds of sacrifices that you and I both have to make are going to make that dream possible. I'm pretty sure that's what he was trying to say.
Okay, so when you talk about nobility, you're talking about spiritual capital, aren't you? You're talking about something that's wider than just self-worth.
Absolutely. It's the inherent sense that every child should be born into this earth with that idea whispered in their ears. I mean, it doesn't happen, but that's what we're supposed to do as parents and as elders and as adults, is supposed to give every child on this planet the belief, the possibility of the belief that they are born noble. We are in fact doing just the opposite. I could give numerous examples from a religious or a political or a partisan point of view about the mismessaging, the negative messaging that we give children about who they really are. And that includes, until recently, our exclusion of children from the consultations of the world about great problems like human trafficking or child marriage or climate change. So I think it's absolutely important that we look to the spiritual within us to tap into that wellspring of qualities that's going to help us solve these very complex problems.
So that's an empowering process that you don't do later in life, but you install on every human being from the cradle to the grave.
In the family, in the school, in the street, in your encounters with other people's children. There isn't an interaction that I can think of in which we should not be constantly conveying to children their nobility, however rich or poor they are. And I think that messaging of nobility is going to greatly transform how they develop as they age.
You also talk about social capital. Now, that's now become quite a well-known term, not by everyone probably, but it's about how we build up our strengths and our empowerment through the networks we create. Is social capital a part of your model as well? And something you can do across boundaries, or sometimes does it reinforce the boxes we're in?
It does both. It does both, because breaking out of these boxes that we've been stuck in, that are boxes that are tradition bound, is not just a matter of opening up a door or a window. You have to break out of them. You have to work your way out of them. And you have to develop an attitude that is very much a part of that YASO model, which I'll mention right now. The YASO model includes social capital as one of the many forms of capital that academic administrators try to tap into when they're trying to address the needs and the challenges of students of color in colleges and universities. But it's only one of them. It asks them to look at their peers and their other social contexts and contacts, and ask them, how do students utilize these contacts? How do you work with your peers? How do you share information with your peers? How do you mobilize your peers? And it may be different from one cultural or ethnic group or one gender group to another. It may be one way among sports jocks in colleges and universities. It may be another way among religious students, students who are associated with religious groups on campuses. So that along with the social capital that's part of the YASO model is an aspirational capital. And that is what is it that people aspire to be or to become? And is that what brings them to this site of education or to this marriage or to this workplace? I mean, what are you aspiring to? And are you aware of what that is? Another one is linguistic. A lot of us bring a certain kind of linguistic capital to our workplaces, to our families. And that's very powerful because there's clear research that tells us that people who are polyglots or who have mastered more than one language have different brains from other people. We know this from studying children at the age of 3 or 4 who are learning 3 or 4 languages. So that we know that the ability to code switch, for example, is an important aspect of linguistic capital. But there are others, the social ones you mentioned, the navigational. And then I think one of the most important in the YASO model is what's called, it's called resistance capital. And it's called resistance capital because it means the sometimes thousands of years of experiences working for social justice against a very unjust system that students of color bring to the campus, that people bring to the workplace, that you bring to your social worlds. And these years and years are built up in families over generations. You may have 3 or 4 living generations of people in your family who have rather a high level of resistance capital because they've got an enormous body of knowledge about how to fight the system, how to build alliances and coalitions across culture, across race, across gender. And this resistance capital is, I think, the dreamiest part in a way of the YASO model, because it's focused on social justice and it's focused on sharing the knowledge, that the things that we've learned about what works and what doesn't work with other people.
In what you've just said now, you mentioned the word navigation, and you have talked about in the past, I know, navigational capital. Now, is that an essential skill to get people to navigate outside of their boxes and to link with other people and to get an understanding of other people's perceptions of the world? And how do you develop navigational capital? It sounds a lovely word, but it's not easy to do, is it?
Right. I'm gonna use Mandela as my fallback again, because there's this famous quote that he made when an Afrikaans guard first confronts him on Robin Island in prison, and the guy is about to have a physical encounter with him. And Mandela says to him, "If you lay a hand on me, I will take you to the highest court in the land. And when I am done with you, he will be as poor as a church mouse." I mean, he took the moment to control his emotions, to master his emotions, to master the moment, to understand that the only way he was going to be able to maximize a successful outcome in that exchange was to not go violent, was to not go reactionary, was to make it very clear that as an attorney and a lawyer, he was very well aware of what the impact of prison violence might be if anybody at all engaged in encounter with him. So he dismantled the possibility of violence and he transformed it into something else. That's a kind of a navigational skill. I mean, it's a skill that falls into other areas too, but a navigational skill also has to do with how do you introduce yourselves to a group that is outside your social sphere, outside your racial group, across your gender group. How do you do that? And what reasons are you doing it for? And what do you bring to the table that can be shared with that group to help them do the things that they want to do? So navigational capital also refers to our willingness to acknowledge that all of the institutions, the structures in our society, the corporations, the businesses, the schools, the family structures, all of this can be very supportive or unsupportive as we try to reach across these groups to try to make permanent relationships with one another, not temporary ones.
Okay, so I mean, is this possible to do? I mean, can you do it yourself? Is it a personal journey, or does it demand a transformation of society? It's the old question. I mean, do we change ourselves to change society, or do we change society to change ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not a chicken and egg thing because, you know, society's not going to change unless we do. And the big goal here is to make this a better world. Am I not right? So if I'm wrong about that, tell me. But I think most of us want a better world, and we want to try to make it a better world for more people, not just for a few people. And so the disequilibrium that I referred to earlier is the state that we're in now. And what spiritual capital and all of these other forms of capital help to do is to take that fulcrum and use that center to rebalance society. You know, there has to be something that can allow us to reach through across cultures and races and income levels and educational levels. And in my experience, whether it's, you know, in a research institution in the sort of protected first world, or if I'm out working in the field in low-income countries that are struggling around some very powerful issues, it has to happen at the personal level. I'll give you an example of a very silly way in which I've challenged myself. You know, in low-income countries, if you're out in the field a lot, you become familiar with the term called bucket showers. And bucket showers exist because not everybody can just reach up and turn on the tap, you know. There is, if you're lucky, a big vat of water in what might be a part of your home or outside your home that you use to bathe every day. And you have to make that water last for a week or for 2 weeks or however long is the deadline for your water shortages, at whatever level your drought is at. One of the things that we can do in the first world, because we do have these spigots we can just turn on, is have a pretend bucket shower, which means turn the water on for maybe 10 seconds, turn the spigot off, soap up, turn the spigot back off, and turn the spigot back off and rinse off. We call it jokingly the first world version of the bucket shower. It's a very small thing, but it changes how you think about water.
Okay, but you know, I mean, that's a good analogy that you can use, but if someone wanted to know how you get from where we are now to where we want to be, someone's asked that question, how do we do it? I mean, how do you give an example that's not a bucket shower one, but it's one that they could understand in their own lives?
Well, I mean, you know, if people, there are already people in Flint, Michigan to Chennai, India, who are dealing with water shortages. We've already got the no DAPL movement here in the States, which is trying to prevent the pipeline from coming in and polluting the water in the Dakotas. So, I mean, I think that people have real life confrontation with the danger that water is about to be challenged. Water is about to be, water shortages are about to be created. If we don't make clean water available to more different kinds of people in more places, so that the experience of having clean water is available to more citizens of more countries who will then begin to demand it of their leaders.
Yeah, but I understand that. I think everyone will understand that. But if you're living in our country, your country, where there's not water shortages, and you want to make the changes so people can see across boxes, how do you do it? I mean, for example, you talk about, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but is it ikigai, which is you know, trying to see what makes you wake up in the morning with a smile on your face and develop it from there. I mean, can you give some help to people who don't have water shortages, but they want to see outside their boxes? How do they do it?
I mean, I think the Ikigai philosophy is very helpful. It's a Japanese philosophy that ran between I think the 8th and the 12th centuries in Japan. And it's based on thinking about what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And it's a way of thinking about how to be a new person on this planet by looking at what then becomes your passion, what becomes your mission, what becomes your profession, and what becomes your vocation. And it's asking people to think about having their needs satisfied in a different kind of way. So that it's back to this idea of what kind of capital do you bring to the table? What kind of wealth have you created for yourself that's not totally materialistic? what kind of wealth can you share with other people that's not totally materialistic to help them in their pursuit of either social justice or equal rights. I mean, you know, I remember ages ago at a UN conference on population and development, there was a woman who was chief of women's organizations in Nigeria. And she was asked a question, I don't remember the question, but her answer was, if the rich people of the world do not share their wealth with the poor will share their poverty with the rich. And that's already become true. Even in Britain, I've been in Britain when you've had electricity shortages. So you all have had to deal with that. It might be on a very limited basis compared to low-income nations, but it's not like we haven't had blackouts here in the United States. We in the United States have had the kind of water problems that are perhaps not happening in Boston where I am, but they certainly are happening in the Midwestern states. And there certainly have been droughts in California and fires that are going to exacerbate droughts. So that everybody should be noticing, making their visual screen, if you will, much more aware of the fact that we may not have personally water shortages in our own home or electricity outages in your own home, but even in places where they do exist, where those things do exist, extraordinary things happen.
Okay, I mean, someone called Anne Bennett has said the shower example is one that couldn't be more real to life, so she's all with you there. But you know, how can you do this so it's sustainable? That, you know, we're going to have a world in chaos. We've got power elites, and mentions the Oxbridge elites in England. I mean, when you've got all these things against you, chaos, climate change, elitism, and so on, how can you, you know, sustain a nobility that will see you through all this and make you come out the other end still intact?
Right. I mean, I don't know how else to phrase this except making a spiritual commitment. You know, I made mine. I don't know how other people made theirs, but I mean, I think you have to make a spiritual commitment to a set of principles and then stick to them. And they can't be negotiable. They have to be principles that, in my case, are, you know, the oneness of all religions, which means to me, all of the religions are equal. And I believe that. And I treat people of all religions the same way, down to the letter of the law. Or the equality of men and women. And these are the principles of this age that we have to embrace if we're going to expect levels of social justice to increase for other people. And they cannot only exist within a certain part of the world. I mean, these sort of delineations between first world, third world, these are artificial, you know, class categories that have been created by centuries of the patriarchal imprint that I'm sorry if people are tired of hearing it, but, you know, patriarchy has destroyed the possibilities of access and empowerment of a lot of people in the world. It tells little girls they have to be married at 6 and they can't go to school after 14 years old. I mean, there was I'll tell you a very powerful story about some kids in Jaipur in India. These were kids who are already living in a resettlement camp. And they had a school, and they noticed one day, there were about 7 girls and 6 boys. And they noticed one day that one of the girls was missing. And then the next day she was missing and she didn't go to school. And these kids went to their instructor and tried to find out what happened to the girl. The short story is that she had been promised in child marriage and was taken out of the loop, clearly taken out of school. These children became relentless pursuers of the oneness of humanity and the equality of men and women by using the social justice principle of creating justice in their own lives. They went to their head of the school. They went to all of their parents. They went to the parents of the girl who was absent. They went to civic officials. They went to religious officials. They went to the policing officials. They did not let anyone off the hook here, and demanded to know where this child was and that she be returned to school. Now, the first thing that happened was eventually they wore everybody down. And the embarrassment and shame that these children were able to cause to the adult community was such that the girl was returned. Later on, she was able to get released from this arranged marriage that she didn't want. And that's always not going to happen that way. But I think it's a great example of if children can have an awareness of this type of social justice, if they can be absolutely persistent and vigilant about a mission, this is the best expression of the Ikigai principle, because what do you love? In this case, what do you love? We love being together as a group. What are you good at? We're good at being together. We're good at maintaining friendships and sustaining those friendships. What's professionally at stake for you? Professionally, what's at stake is that we're in school and preparing for professions. We want all of us to be able to do that. And then what does the world need? The world needs you to fight. It's back to the Obama quote about, yeah, you may have community, you may want community, but are you willing to fight for it? Are you willing to sustain it? And these children were willing to sustain that sense of community. If kids can do it, we can.
Okay, well, we've just gone over our half-hour slot now. So just one final question, if you could answer it briefly. If anyone wants to get to know more about your ideas and about what you do, how would they go about doing it?
Well, firstly, they can go to LinkedIn. For the moment, my website is under construction, but they can always access me on LinkedIn. And I usually do a blog a week. I've done one recently that was based on a Cree Indian philosophy called Call on God, but Row Away from the Rocks. And I've talked about some issues in that. My book, Women, War, and Violence, Personal Perspectives and Global Activism, was published several years ago, and it's about encounters with gender-based violence around the world. It's an edited anthology that includes my work on post-war Liberia. And you know, I can always be reached through social media for the moment. Once my site is up, I can pass the completed website up to you, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody about these issues.
Okay, so anyone who wants to look on LinkedIn, it's Robin M. Chandler. And Robin, if you could send me a link to your book, we'll put that up as well. And, you know, go there and have a look at those ideas. Look up some of the ideas that Robin's mentioned in this, the philosophy she's mentioned, and people can engage in that and find out a lot more. Anyhow, thank you, Robin. That's been a really, really interesting webinar. And it's come up with a lot of interesting ideas about how we can jump out of those boxes, navigate between them, and actually understand our basic nobility. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Blessings to everyone.
And we'll stop this webinar now and say good night to everyone.